Welcome everybody to the Wide in the Middle, your home for, of course, all things racing with me, Thomas Brandon, and I'm flying solo again today. Unfortunately, my man Keith, he is literally stuck in traffic. Keith actually lives, if you guys remember, Keith's out in Ohio, and he's like stuck on the freeway right now. There was apparently an overturned semi, I want to say, like on the freeway. Last I had talked to him, he had not moved in an hour. He had been in his car. They have not moved for an hour. So, excuse me. Unfortunate. Hopefully that accident, everybody is okay. But yeah, so Keith stuck in traffic, and we're going to soldier on because we couldn't push it back till tomorrow. I've unfortunately already got auto glass stuff scheduled for first thing in the morning, and couldn't do it like any other time today because it's my son's birthday. So going to get it done, and yeah, we'll soldier forward. But we got a couple of things to cover today. Being that I'm by myself, we're going to talk about, obviously, Phoenix. Phoenix is as Phoenix does. I'm going to explain to you why this is not a package and car issue. This is a track issue. This is one of the exceptions to the rule. It's not the car. It's not the package. It's the track. I'll explain more when we get to it. Also, if you don't know, now you know when it comes to Christopher Bell. Christopher Bell is one of the most overrated drivers that I've ever seen in NASCAR. And a big part of that is because most people don't know how good Christopher Bell is. So I'm going to explain to you how good this guy really is and why I think he is going to have a breakout year. When I say breakout, I mean multiple wins. I'll explain it all in that section of the show. We've also got our NASCAR pick'em. Keith did give me his pick for this week's race at Bristol. We're going to cover a little bit, do a preview of the Bristol race. I should say I'm going to do that for you guys. And then we're going to dive into some dirt track racing, and we're going to specifically cover the topic that is being talked about quite a bit, which is the Wicker Bill situation that's going on as High Limit and the World of Outlaws change their rules on the Wicker Bill height. I'm going to explain to you why this is actually a good thing, in my opinion, what this Wicker Bill actually does, why a 1-inch difference going from the 2-inch down to the 1-inch is going to be a good thing, not only for the racing itself, but the on-track product, and also just sprint car racing as a whole. I'll explain all of that on today's show. All right, so Phoenix. That's right, Phoenix. If you did not see this last week's race at Phoenix, I got to be honest with you. That was, in my opinion, one of the better Phoenix races that I think we've seen in terms of racing. Now, let me, first of all, get this out in the open, full disclosure. I am not a fan of Phoenix, especially the current iteration of it. I hate the open dogleg. I hate the fact that we got cars literally driving on the apron below the line in turn one. I don't know why we have a line around the track, supposedly stating the difference between the racing surface and the apron, and then we have cars just running everywhere. It makes zero sense. I fully get the fact that if we did not have the open dogleg, that the racing would probably be even less exciting. And for the most part, it really is only exciting on restarts after the first couple of laps, right, where you got it 4 or 5 wide diving down into turn one. After that, once they get lined out, you don't see too much of that anymore. Denny Hamlin made the comment on his podcast, and it makes a lot of sense, where he doesn't really cut that dog leg when he's actually, racing after restarts and things like that, just because he wants the proper angle going into turn one, which of course, makes a ton of sense. It's pointless to make up a bunch of time cutting the dog leg only to lose it because you're entering the corner too shallow and washing up the track. So I hate the current iteration of it. I preferred the old iteration of Phoenix. Okay. I really did. I wish they had left the track alone when they had to repave it, just repave it and then upgrade the rest of the facilities. Leave the track alone because to me it feels like a gimmick. All right. So that's my thoughts on the track itself. Other than that, the racing was actually pretty good considering. I've heard a lot of people talk about how there's no passing at Phoenix. This last week, the package sucks. They said they were going to change things, make it better, and it wasn't any better. Actually, if you look at what some of the drivers were able to do, it was better. Last year's finale at Phoenix was pretty good when you think about it. And take into consideration the fact of what we usually see with these cars at these shorter tracks. Obviously, we see it at the big tracks too, and it's why the drafting is so important. But clean air, even at a track like Phoenix, is huge. It's absolutely huge. Think about how Ross Chastain was air blocking Ryan Blaney, right? I mean, that was one of the biggest storylines of that race. And I mean, Blaney almost had a meltdown because of it, right? Like it was driving him nuts. But that's racing. That is racing in these cars now. That is what you do. Blaney came from like 15th to win the championship last year in the finale at Phoenix. Christopher Bell came out of the pits and was like 20th, 21st or something like that, and worked his way to the front and won. The best car and driver won that race. That has not always been the case at Phoenix. So yes, we didn't see, we didn't see side-by-side crazy action like we saw at in Atlanta. Or, even cars getting huge runs, sucking up and making moves like we saw at Vegas. We saw Phoenix race like Phoenix. I mean, that's what we saw. This is not a package issue. This is not a car issue. This is a track issue. Phoenix has been like this forever. If you look at Jeff Gluck's, was it a good race poll? It's hilarious because Phoenix actually scored lower than the Clash. Folks, I think the Clash is one of the I can't stand the Clash at the Coliseum. It's way too small. It's not even like people are like, oh, it's like a Friday night at the short tracks. No, it's not. I've been going to short track races my whole life. It ain't like that. Short track racing is way better than what we saw at the Clash. Now, I get it. It's NASCAR. It's at the Coliseum. It's a very unique thing. But the racing product itself, let's not pretend like it's incredible. Okay? Because it's not. So, for Phoenix to finish lower than the Clash, I think that's just absurd. What I think happened is we had a bunch of people, right? When I say a bunch of people, myself included, Joe Q Public, right? NASCAR racing fan, who went into this race with very high hopes because we were hoping like tire, aero changes, all this stuff, and we got another Phoenix type performance. And that's what you get at Phoenix. I will be the first one to tell you, I think the fact that the championship race there sucks. I think it's horrible. I think it's one of the worst racetracks that we have on the schedule in terms of racing. The best races that I've ever seen at Phoenix were not NASCAR races. It was like Copper World Classic, right? USAC midgets. Like those were the best types of racing that I've seen at Phoenix. And that was years ago. That was old Phoenix. That is not what we have now. Phoenix is what Phoenix is. It has always been this way. And for people to talk about how, oh my God, well, when Bell got out front, it was over and he won by such and his gap was huge and he was dominant. It's like people forget what we've had in the past, which is incredible because understand there was a guy who just retired last year who was literally the most dominant driver we've ever seen at that track. His name's Kevin Harvick. I mean, do you guys remember what Harvick did in like, what was it, 2015, 2014, where he led like 260 of the 312 laps, just utter domination. Kyle Busch, another one who's dominated that track on multiple occasions. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has had incredible runs at Phoenix. Jimmy Johnson, Carl Edwards, right? Now, yes, we had that very close battle with Edwards and Harvick edged him out by, what was it, like a couple thousandths of a second or something like that, a couple hundreds. I mean, it was like he beat him by a nose, and it was an incredible finish. That is the exception, not the rule at Phoenix. Phoenix is just what it is. It's not fun. Last weekend, in my opinion, was about as good as it's going to get in terms of the racing there. It's not a car thing. This is not a car thing, guys. It's not. It's not a package thing. It is a Phoenix thing. And this track is going to pretty much race like that no matter what we've got on there. And as long as I've watched races at Phoenix, this has pretty much been what you see. The speeds might change some. There might be a little bit more beating and banging depending on the car. But overall, Phoenix is what it is. And as long as they keep racing there, this is what you can expect. And in my opinion, this last week's race at Phoenix should not be scoring a 60% on it was a bad race, right? It's on whether or not it was a good race, Jeff Gluck-Poll, it's 40% say yes, 60% say no. In my opinion, it was actually a much better race than it's being scored. And if you plan on watching racing at Phoenix, buckle up because that's what you're going to get. And that, in my opinion, like I said, was a good race at Phoenix. All right, so moving on. Speaking of Phoenix and the man who won Phoenix, Christopher Bell. We got to talk about Christopher Bell because here's the thing. Christopher Bell is so underrated. It's incredible how underrated Christopher Bell is. People just don't think of him. And before the season started, Keith and I were going to do a NASCAR. We had these two big episodes that we had planned. One was for NASCAR, where we were going to basically predict our seasons, right? Who we thought was going to be the biggest winner, the biggest losers, right? How many wins, we thought people were going to have. We were going to do some over-unders on drivers. Our final, who was going to make the playoffs, and then who was going to be our final four and who was going to be the champion, okay? We had this all planned out. Obviously, that didn't happen because of all the crap that had happened those weeks, and we ended up not being able to record the episodes. But I want to read to you what I had for Christopher Bell, okay? I want to read you this because, yes, it's easy for me to say this after he just won, but when you hear what my prediction was for Christopher Bell, understand that I could still fall very flat on my face for Christopher Bell. For Christopher Bell, I put that he was going to make the Final Four. I said Christopher Bell, Final Four at Phoenix. Breakout year. I see Bell having at least 5 wins. That is what I put for Christopher Bell for this season. And then on my notes, I put, this is the year that he will no longer be underrated. Those of you who just idolize Kyle Larson, and understand, me and Keith are in that, or we're in that boat, okay? We are front and center on the Kyle Larson hype train. Understand, though, Keith and I are also very big on the Christopher Bell hype train, where most people aren't. You got to realize Christopher Bell he's like Kyle Larson. He really is. Kyle Larson gets more pub. Kyle Larson gets more praise, or he gets more flowers, as the kids call it these days. But Christopher Bell is right there. You can make the argument that Christopher Bell is as good as Kyle Larson. Some can even make the argument, those who are really, that know their stuff, can make the argument that he's better. There was a time he was better. Okay? Especially on the dirt side. There was a time when you showed up to a midget race, USAC midget race, Christopher Bell he was going to win. He was the one to beat, and that was even with Kyle Larson racing. Christopher Bell is hands down one of the most talented overall race car drivers you are going to find on the planet Earth. He is. Kyle Larson doing the doubleheader, right? The Indy 500 and the Coke 600. The only other driver on earth that I would say could legitimately do that is Christopher Bell. That's how good Christopher Bell is. It was absolutely perfect in the NASCAR Full Speed series on Netflix that they literally did nothing on him until it was like the end when we get to the final four. Because that is how the vast majority of people look at Christopher Bell. And it is so disrespectful. Just in terms of how good the guy is. He is so good. If Joe Gibbs Racing would allow it, Christopher Bell would be out running sprint cars on the weekends too, just like Kyle Larson. He'd be out running in the Chili Bowl. He'd be out running, Indiana Midget Week and everything else. Because he is a race car driver, period. There are very few people that I would rather have in my car over Christopher Bell. There is. I mean, he is part of a very small group of drivers that we're talking, to use an NFL term, like, number one draft pick. Like, he is that level of driver in anything. NASCAR, sprint cars, midgets, whatever. The guy could get in and drive anything. So the fact that people are like kind of shocked by this win last week is just absurd to me. The guy is so good. And I think this year he's going to have a breakout year. He has made the Final Four the last 2 seasons, and people act like it's been a fluke. It's not a fluke. He's got, I think it's nine career Cup Series wins, and they're like all at different tracks. It's not like he's only good on one thing. He's good at everything. The guy can flat drive. And I think this season, the rest of the NASCAR world is going to see that. I mean, Tony Stewart said years ago, that in terms of just raw natural ability, it was Kyle Larson and Christopher Bell. Those were the two. And to me, I think those still are the two. I mean, that's, if everyone talks about Kyle Larson as modern day Mario Andretti, well, Christopher Bell could be modern day AJ Foyt if he was allowed to run dirt. He could be. He's that good. And you got just a taste of it this last weekend at Phoenix. And in my opinion, there is a whole lot more to come this season. All right, you guys. So it is now time for our dirt track recap. And on the racing front, not a whole lot to cover. The Outlaws got rained out at Kennedale, and pretty much nothing else has been scheduled in terms of national tours. Lucas Oil doesn't pick back up until next weekend. The Outlaws will be back next weekend. High Limit, it's not until April. USAC midgets are not until like April. So everybody's still got some time. Even the Outlaw late models, I think, will pick back up next weekend as well. So most everybody's been off. It's only been the sprint cars on the Outlaw side that have had anything scheduled, and they've only gotten one race in over the last couple weeks. They got after they ran at Volusia in February, they've gotten one race in out of the last 4 scheduled, which was the win that Donnie Schatz had at Volusia on March 4th during the Bike Week Jamboree. Other than that, everything else has been rained out. Now, there has been a lot of news, though, in sprint car racing. Now, this actually came about a few weeks ago when the Outlaws and High Limit, they have not, from my understanding is they have not made it an official rule, although it sounds like they're going to. And maybe they have by now, and I just haven't seen the report, but I know that there was just a report, what was it, yesterday or the day before, where Pennsylvania Tracks announced a new Wicker Bill rule for sprint cars. So you've got BAPS, Lincoln, Port Royal, and Williams Grove. You're talking about, obviously, when we look at, PA Posse country, those four tracks are, like the ones you think of. Um, they have announced a new Wicker Bill rule, and they are adopting essentially the rule that the national tours have, which is high limit and the Outlaws. And that is a maximum 1-inch Wicker Bill. Now, Danny Dietrich posted on Twitter, well, X, whatever the hell it's called now. He said, there's not much to say about the new Wicker Bill rule other than it's about damn time. This should immediately make for better racing, less rubber down tracks, less tire wear, and less wear and tear on our engines. So this has been a hot topic because if you remember, we actually, those of you who've been paying attention, about a week or so ago, maybe it's been a little bit longer now, there was 2 speedways in Ohio that went the opposite way. Attica and I can't remember the other one. But they essentially were like, hey, we're going the opposite way. We're going to run 3-inch Wicker Bills for our local, weekly series. Now, keep in mind, the track can do this. So when I was running sprint cars and setting them up and doing all that stuff years and years ago, at our tracks that we ran our weekly 410 stuff in, we had a different Wicker Bill rule than the Outlaws. Okay? In fact, we could run a Wicker Bill, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we couldn't run a Wicker Bill with the Outlaws. Now, if I'm remembering my time frame correctly, because it's been so long ago, I want to say that was the wing that the Outlaws had, where the last 12 inches of the wing could be dished. I think, man, it's been so long ago. But I remember what we ran typically and what we ran with the Outlaws when they came to town were different. So it is done. The problem is that all of the notes and all the setup stuff that you have is completely different when you go changing that Wicker Bill. Now you might think, right? You might think you're like, well, dude, Tommy, it's an inch. How big a difference can that make? Actually, it's huge. Huge. Think about it in terms of the NASCAR Cup Series. A Wicker Bill is basically just like what you see on the back of a Cup car. That spoiler that sticks straight up on a Cup car. On a sprint car, it's the same thing. It is a flat piece of metal that sticks up. It's at 90 degrees on the wing, and it's right at the back of the wing. It's just a flat piece of steel that goes across the back, or aluminum, okay? That Wicker Bill, they've been running a maximum of 2 inches. Now, keep in mind, you have the option to run up to 2 inches. That doesn't mean you always run it. That Wicker Bill will increase the downforce of the wing, but also the drag. Which you have to understand when you start, and look, I am not an aerodynamicist. I am just a geek and kind of study this stuff and kind of, just do my own thing with that. I just love learning about it. I am such a nerd. I will sit and read, CFD reports on, how aerodynamics work around an F1 car, so just because I'm a geek, okay? I just nerd out on this stuff. And when I started seeing this stuff pop up, I started doing some research on it. A 1-inch change on the Wicker Bill is a significant change, not only in the grip level or downforce level that you will see on the wing, but also the dirty air coming off that wing. So when we talk about dirty air, you have to understand it that when we think of dirty air, think of the hole, the size of the hole being punched in the air. People think of air, they almost think of it like it's nothing. Air it's a fluid, okay? It's just a very, very thin fluid, I guess would be the easiest way to describe it. Imagine driving down the highway, okay? Now, the example I'm going to give you is an extreme, but this will illustrate the point. Imagine you're driving down the highway and you're just in a regular everyday car, right? You're in a Chevy Impala, Ford, Fusion, right? A Toyota Corolla, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just your little everyday car, four-door sedan. And you're going down the highway at 65 miles per hour, and you have another car in front of you. That is essentially the same type of car, a four-door sedan, right? Think of the air that you feel coming off that car in front of you. You can get a good sense of it if you roll down your window and you stick your hand out the window. Okay? Now, imagine that car in front of you is not a car, but it is an 18-wheeler. And now you're behind it. Stick your hand out that window. The air that you are going to feel on your hand is very, very different than the air that you will feel on your hand with a small car in front of you. And that is because of the hole that the semi-truck is punching through that air. So think of the air as like a solid wall. When that truck drives through it, that is the hole that it is punching through that wall. Now, when that truck goes through it, you got to imagine that that hole gets opened up, and then as that truck goes through, that air is trying to close back around the backside of the truck. But the bigger the hole that it makes, the longer it's going to take for it to close that hole, okay? This is why when you have a car following another car, we talk about dirty air. This is why the draft in NASCAR is such a big deal, because the hole that's being punched is big. That car can suck up behind the other car because it doesn't have to punch as hard through that hole because there's nothing there for it to punch through, essentially. When you have a 2-inch wicker bill, that hole is bigger. Not only is it bigger, but what it's doing is the air that is coming off the top of the wing, the top and bottom of the wing, it has to now go up as it hits that wicker bill. It's going to go up higher, and it's going to create a bigger hole. Even though it doesn't sound like much, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's significant, especially when you're talking about those speeds. And keep in mind, yes, there is some aerodynamics to the body of a sprint car, right? The hood and side panel, stuff like that. But overall, the downforce is the wings, okay? Specifically, the top wing. So when you are behind another car, this is why you see these guys now. Go watch a sprint car race, 15 years ago, 15 years ago, back when they used to run a 1-inch wicker bill before they went to the 2-inch. Go watch how those guys used to race. You actually could follow other cars. You would see them follow other cars. Now, when you watch these guys are changing lanes constantly, and it's not because they want to. It's because they're just searching for clean air. Clean air is such a big deal. If the car in front of you is running high, you're going to run low just because you've got to get that clean air. You have to. Otherwise, your car is just not going to work as well. That's all there is to it. When you drop that wicker bill down an inch, I think you're going to see much better racing in terms of people being able to close up on the car in front of them and not just have to search for clean air. They can actually establish a run and make a legitimate move. And if their car works better up top, even though they've got cars in front of them, they can run up top, close that gap, and then make a move, as opposed to just being like, well, dude, I got to go to the bottom because I just got to have clean air. My car's faster up top, but I got to go low because I need clean air. So I think this wicker bill change is definitely going to help. Also, when you decrease downforce, you are decreasing overall grip. One of the things that happened with the 2-inch wicker bill, and you can see it these days with the way these guys drive. Watch how they run go watch, once again, go to YouTube, watch some videos. I'm sure somebody's got videos out there of comparing 1-inch and 2-inch wicker bills. And if somebody didn't make it, you could, do some research and look for yourself on YouTube. But go watch some videos of, the Outlaws. And don't just look at little tracks. Look at big tracks too. Go watch how they would run the bottom. Go watch how Danny Lasowski would run the bottom when he was at Knoxville. And then go compare it to just last year, the year before, Donnie Schatz running the bottom. And you will see the difference. The left rear sticks so much harder with that 2-inch wicker bill. It's not even funny. And what happens is you can carry so much more speed into the corner and just stick the left rear now that the car is so much more planted. The drivers don't have to be, and keep in mind, this, they don't have to be as good with the throttle as they did before. That does not mean that they still don't have to be very, very good with the throttle. You do, okay? Yeah, absolutely. But throttle control is more of an aspect. Also, when you stick the left rear so much harder, what we're seeing now, and I actually saw a clip of somebody talking about this too. Who the hell was this? It was a PA driver. I think it was Dietrich, actually. It might have been Danny Dietrich. But they were talking about the track rubbering down because of this. And this is something that you will also see as well, where cars are running the cushion, but where the car, not the cushion, but like a groove down, will start taking rubber because of the left rear. They're sticking that left rear so hard. And rubber down tracks are not great. They happen, and they're always going to happen. There's always going to be instances where the track just takes rubber. But if you can avoid rubber down tracks, you want to avoid it, because there's times when you can have rubber down track and it can be as fast and sometimes faster than the tacky, depending on how the size of the track and how much rubber it takes. So that is all due to the wicker. Also, keep in mind, when you increase that downforce level, that drag, you're increasing the strain the motor is under to pull that car. And so reducing that wicker is also going to reduce the wear and tear on the motors. And it's not going to be a ton, but it will be some. And when you have motors that cost $50, $60, $70,000, and you have to refresh them every, 8 to 10 races, maybe 12 to 15, depending on the motor, right? And it's 12 grand, 15 grand to refresh them. I mean, my God, if you could reduce that cost just a little bit, that's huge. So I'm all for the 1-inch wicker bill. I think it's a good move. I like the fact that we're seeing that. Personally, I wouldn't mind seeing them just get rid of the wicker bill, to be honest. I understand why they have it, but I wouldn't mind seeing them just get rid of it. I mean, those wings are going to generate so much downforce regardless whether or not they've got that wicker bill. That wing, think of an airplane wing upside down. That's what that wing is. It doesn't create lift. It creates downforce. And people think the downforce being generated by the air actually hitting the wing. Like it's the angle of the wing, the air hits it straight on and it pushes it down. That's not the way downforce works. Downforce is generated by creating high pressure and low pressure. And when you have the low pressure and the high pressure, low pressure being on the bottom, right? It's going to push it down. It actually sucks it down. This is how, when we talk about like on the Cup cars, you've got the underbody being sealed off with the diffuser. Well, what you're creating is a high pressure and a low pressure. And when the car's got the low pressure underneath it, now it's going to actually suck the car down. I wouldn't mind seeing them get rid of the wicker bills. I think they would still generate a ton of downforce, and I think the racing could be really good. Now, there are some people that will say, hey, if we get rid of the wicker bills, you're going to see just too much separation in the cars. I don't know if that would happen. Once again, like I said, I'm not an aerodynamicist. I just have fun with this stuff. I'm just a geek with it. But I do think it's going to be interesting when we finally get to consistent racing, where we'll be able to look at, hey, we got a 1-inch wicker bill on the national tours. And then you look at the track, you look at, Attica, where they're going 3-inch. I mean, we'll be able to compare it head to head and see which one's better. I think the 1-inch is going to win out, and I'm hoping that's the route they go, because I think it'll be much better racing than what we're seeing now. And look, the racing is still incredible. It's not like the racing's bad. We still have incredible racing. And the good news is if it doesn't work, unlike NASCAR, right? It doesn't take forever to make a change. They could just flat say, hey, look, we're going back to the 2-inch wicker bill. Boom, problem solved, right? I mean, it could be done overnight. So I like it. I'm glad to see drivers like Danny Dietrich. You're talking about one of the best PA drivers out there, saying, hey, look, this is a step in the right direction. It's about damn time we do this. This is going to be good. So that makes me feel better, in my opinion, because, like I said at the beginning, I am a nobody. I just talk about this stuff and have fun with it. I am not a driver or professional. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. All right, so we're going to move on here to our NASCAR pick'em. Now, really quick, just to recap last week, I had Denny Hamlin. Keith had Ross Chastain. It started off looking pretty good for me. I was pretty happy with what I was seeing. Hamlin started, on the pole, was looking good, and unfortunately just kind of wasn't able to close the deal at the end. Chastain was able to finish sixth. The star of the show, like I talked about earlier, was Christopher Bell. I think you're going to see Bell really, really have a blow-up season. I do. It's going to be absolutely a big year for him, in my opinion. That's what I think we're going to see. But anyways, this next week, we've got Bristol coming up. Now, keep in mind, Bristol, the Cup cars, they do not run the short track package at Bristol. They run the regular package, which is essentially basically the same package that they run at the short tracks. It's just, it's just the full the diffuser and the normal rear spoiler. Okay. So 670 horsepower, 4-inch rear spoiler, and the full rear diffuser. We'll see how the tires are. Bristol, this is going to be the first time we've been back at Bristol on the concrete in the springtime. Okay. We've been running dirt there for the last couple of years, which, thank God, we're not running dirt at Bristol anymore, because I did not enjoy that at all. So I'm glad they're back on the concrete. It should be a fun race. Hopefully we'll get a lot of people there and a lot of people watching. And yeah, hopefully it'll be a good race. So Keith got to pick, Keith picked Kyle Larson for his pick'em this week. I am actually going a different route. I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski. Keselowski has won at Bristol a couple of times, I think 3 to be exact. And I think he's going to break his winless streak this year. He's been running obviously much, much better. RFK as a whole, Buescher's been the flag carrier for him, and he's been doing really, really well. But I think Keselowski is going to get back to victory lane this year. I do. And hopefully he'll do it here at Bristol, so I can get out into an early lead in our NASCAR pick'em. So that is our NASCAR pick'em. And before we wrap things up today, we do have a listener email. It is, if you want to email us, you can. It's ask3wide@gmail.com. That is ask3wide@gmail.com. And this is from Jameson. Jameson? From Jameson. I had to take a double look at that real quick because I thought I was misreading it. But it's from Jameson. So Jameson writes, Tommy, Keith, this week I was listening to DBC. I imagine he's talking about Door Bumper Clear. That would be my guess, right? That's DBC. I was listening to DBC, and they were asked what they would do if they could be I think that's czar. Is that what he says? If they could be the czar of NASCAR? I haven't listened to Door Bumper Clear this week, so I'll have to listen to that. But I think that's what he's saying, the czar of NASCAR, which the czar is that was like the Russian ruler, back in the day. So they must be talking if you were the ruler of NASCAR. So I was listening to DBC. They were asked what they would do if they were the czar of NASCAR, and I thought it would be a good question to ask you and Keith. So if you could do anything or change anything in the NASCAR Cup Series, what would it be? Thanks. Love the show, Jameson. All right. So that is an interesting question. If I was the czar of NASCAR And I'll have to go listen to DBC this week. You guys know I usually listen to the racing podcast after we do ours. I don't like to be influenced by them. Occasionally I'll watch some clips and stuff like that, but I don't listen to the full episodes till after. And I haven't listened to DBC this week, so that's a pretty good question. I'll have to go listen to that because those guys I'm sure have some good answers. But if I was the czar of NASCAR, the first thing that I would do is I would increase the horsepower. I know that the horsepower topic is become it's become pablum. It's just to a point now where it's just ridiculous. Where you've got so many people just being like, horsepower, give us horsepower. Denny Hamlin basically saying like, hey, one phone call and we could do this. And then people, well, like, what do you mean? What do you know? Well, he's a car owner. Well, he's just repeating what Doug Yates said a while ago, which is basically like, hey, look, man, these things have just got a plate on them. Now, I know that there's more to it than that. But folks, we've talked about this before ad nauseum. These cars, I'm not in NASCAR, but NASCAR is running the most expensive 670 horsepower motor on the planet. It's ridiculous. Motor bills, engine bills have not gone down. The engines are designed to run, I think they run twice. Like there's a set amount of miles that these engines can run. And whatever it is, it comes in at about, I think it's 2 races, essentially, 1,000 miles or something like that. If they wanted to get more horsepower out of these motors, they could do it. They absolutely could do it. And there was a clip, I talked about watching clips, there was a clip that I saw on YouTube, must have been yesterday when I was doing some work, where Dale Earnhardt Jr. was talking to Kyle Larson, and Kyle Larson said, dude, we could get these things to 1,000 horsepower tomorrow.
And all these, engine builders and teams are saying it's not going to cost any different to do it. I've heard our, Scotty Maxim say the same thing. He's like, dude, we could bring 1,000 horsepower next week.
Right.
And it not anymore. They're literally taking the engine that I won with at Vegas and making it a 1,000 horsepower engine to put in one of Rick's personal cars they're building right now. So they can do it.
And he said that their motor builder is using, I think, the motor that he ran at Vegas, that Larson ran at Vegas. They're making that engine 1,000 horsepower and putting it in a car for Rick Hendrick. Like, boom, done, 1,000 horsepower. To me, until you get these cars to spin the tires, you're going to have this type of racing at the short tracks. You just are. That's all there is to it. Now, I've heard the argument before that if we give the drivers more horsepower, we're going to have more separation in the cars. We just are. And I understand there's a trade-off there. It's a balance. Obviously, the parity aspect of it is what makes it exciting. Everybody's close, right? Anybody can make a move and win. I mean, for the most part. But you look at like the 1.5 miles right now. This car is incredible at the 1.5 miles. It is. It really is. I would like to see them have a little more horsepower at the 1.5 miles just because the aero blocking is so insane that it would be nice to have a little bit more horsepower at your disposal to try to overcome that. Okay. Now, whether or not they could, I don't know. And that's the thing. This would actually have to be tested. You would need to go to 1.5 miles, a fast 1.5 miles. So a track like a Kansas or a Charlotte, even a Vegas. And you would need to have a few cars running, have a lead car out there, and then have the other guys behind them in dirty air and see, hey man, can this help? Because there is the possibility that if you give them, for example, let's just say we give them 750 at the 1.5 miles, there is the possibility that the lead car now with clean air and more horsepower can just have an even greater advantage with that clean air. right? Now they're just going even faster, and the cars behind them in dirty air are just struggling even more. They've got more horsepower, but they can't get it to the ground because of the dirty air. That is a possibility. Until they test that, I don't know. But here's my thing with NASCAR that pisses me off. They won't even test it. Like everybody brings up horsepower and they're just like, it's like the one thing they just won't do. I don't get it. I don't understand what the holdup is. They will sit there and say, all options on the table. People say horsepower and they're just like, nah, accept that. Accept horsepower, not doing horsepower. It drives me nuts. I wish if they're not going to come out and tell everybody why. Don't say manufacturers. That's bullshit. I don't want to hear that. That is such crap. You cannot tell us that and justify that when team owners are saying, dude, the motor bills haven't gone down. The manufacturers are spending just as much, if not more, than they were before. Right? And we're talking, well, Honda's coming in. If Honda states in a press conference, look, we're going to come to NASCAR as long as the horsepower ain't above 670. If it goes above 670, then we ain't coming. Unless Honda says that, I don't want to hear about manufacturers. I'm so tired of the song and dance. I really am. It's bullshit. It pisses me off because I've talked about this before. What made me fall in love with NASCAR was the fact that you had ordinary men in extraordinary cars doing incredible things. That's what you had. You had Dale Earnhardt, right? Who you looked at, for example, and he was, just he was an everyday guy, right? He looked like somebody who could be a cattle rancher just as much as he was a race car driver. And then he went out in that car with, 800 horsepower and just drove the wheels off it. That was incredible to watch. They became like superheroes. Watching Harry Gant sliding around, running the high side. You know what I mean? Like that was cool. That was awesome to watch. And now you've got these cars where we've gone the opposite direction. And they've got less horsepower. You can just mat the gas. So for me, the first thing that I would change is horsepower. I would absolutely change that. I would increase it. The other thing that I would do, and this is where things can get into trouble, but everyone's complaining about the racing aspect, okay? So what I would do is, what I would like to see NASCAR do, if I was the czar, I would leave the intermediate package alone, okay? And I would leave the intermediate car alone, meaning I would allow teams to build a short track car, short track / road course car, and a super speedway car. And I would actually give them some more wiggle room with the car, but I would impose a cost cap. See, when we talk about trying to maintain this level of parity in NASCAR while making sure that we don't have teams that are just spending obscene amounts of money, because that's what will happen. If you just say, hey, you guys, here's the rules, you can start playing with these cars, what we're going to see is we're going to see Hendrick and Gibbs, the teams that we always see up front, RFK, Childress, 2311, and they're going to start just spending like a bunch of drunken sailors on shore leave, and they're going to be looking for fractions of a second, and they're going to find it. They're going to find it. You're going to see cars showing up to the track. They're going to be all skewed out, bunch of yaw in it. One side's going to be flat. The other side's going to be protruding out and all this stuff like that. That's what you're going to see. They're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a half a horsepower increase, right? Like that's what you would see. I would like to see them have a little bit of wiggle room that they could actually R&D and develop on this car with, but impose a cost cap. NASCAR wants to be like these stick and ball sports so much. Have a salary cap, have a cost cap, and make that, say, hey, look, you guys, you can spend money on R&D. You can do these things, But that goes towards your cost cap, and your cost cap is X amount per year. You can't spend more than this amount of money on those things. So to me, that's kind of the only way we're going to fix the short track racing, road courses and stuff like that with this car, is by allowing the teams to kind of R&D on them a little bit and make some changes. These things that NASCAR's doing, like I said, we saw some incremental improvements at Phoenix. We've got a tire that's still, there's some fall off, but it's not a lot. It's not a ton. There's, the aero stuff. There was some guys say like, hey, it made a little bit of a difference. That's good. But also, when you take aero away, you're also decreasing tire wear. The teams have got to find that grip somewhere else. These cars now, the way that they're running them, the aero platform is so important. I mean, everything that they're doing is basically to maximize the aero platform, and then mechanical balance. They're just, essentially you've got your shocks, you've got your ARBs, your anti-roll bars. Maybe you're going to put some rounds in and out of the corners, right? For weight, you got nose weight, like those types of things. But overall, it's really the aero platform, and it's going to be like that at every track with the exception of like a Martinsville, right? These really, really small tracks. So until you can actually have these guys develop some, quote unquote, short track cars, I don't think you're going to see any of that separation. I think the racing is going to be what it is. Especially when you've got the shifting, you've got the horsepower restraints that we see, because you've got to be able to buzz those tires off. You got to be able to pull up out of that corner in the same gear to eliminate the shifting. The ratios with a 5-speed transmission, right? It's sequential shifting transmission. The way that the ratios are so close, it's not a penalty to shift gears anymore. You see, before with that H pattern shifter, it was a penalty. It was a penalty to shift gears. Even if it was, when I say a penalty, I mean it cost you speed because the ratios were so far apart. Fourth gear, in order to reach your top speed, the gear ratio that you had to use to reach top speed, you couldn't just drop that down to third and go. It was too far apart. So there was a penalty for that. It cost you in speed and lap time. That's not the case anymore. Now you can just drop down a gear, boom, stomp throttle, go out the corner, and then grab another gear. So horsepower to me is the only way to get rid of the shifting. It's the only way to fix that issue. And if you're going to increase the horsepower, then to me, you've got to allow these teams to R&D these cars on the short track level. Like I said, we're short track. I would make the intermediate stuff. I would say, hey, what you guys have got now, that's for intermediate. You can R&D 2 cars for short tracks and road courses. Here's your box that you're in. Here's your cost cap to do it. And then make those teams work and see what happens. What's the worst case scenario that could happen with that? Right? What's the worst case scenario that could happen with that? At the end of this, let's say NASCAR says, hey, this is what we're going to do in 2025. Okay, sweet. And then they do it in 2025, and it turns out that, hey, man, that actually wasn't good. Well, at least they tried. That's my thing. At least they tried. Right now, it seems like they're not really trying. They say they are. They do these half-assed, like, kind of little piddly things, but they're not really trying. So let's say they did that, and then 2025 comes, and they run it, and then it's worse. What's the worst case scenario? They say, all right, we're just going back to what we had then. Okay. No problem. Guess what? You can do that. Your intermediate cars are your short track cars again. Boom. Problem solved. So that's what I would do if I was a NASCAR czar. Will that happen? No, it won't. But it's a fun game to play. So thank you for the question, Jameson. And like I said, if you would like to email Keith and I a question, racing, anything, life, it doesn't matter. Just send it to ask3wide. That is ask the number 3 wide at gmail.com. All right, you guys, that is going to do it for today. Thank you very much as always for joining me. Keith and I will be back next week. Please do me a favor, download, like, share, subscribe, all that other good stuff. Those of you who have left us a rating on Spotify, 5 stars. I really appreciate it. That's awesome. We've only got, I think it's like 4 or 5, but still, the fact that you did that is awesome. I really appreciate it. And also the rating and reviews on Apple podcasts is also incredible. So to all of you who have done that, I really appreciate it. And to just everybody out there who's listening, thank you very much. We will be back to do it all over again next week. So have a good weekend. Enjoy whatever racing is out there. Hope Bristol is a good one. And I will see you all again next Thursday. And until then, as always, take care.